Today is day 69 of 90 days in my 90-day SAT prep series. For today's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some of my math tips and tricks in this video, as well as some of my reading tips and tricks, because I really want you guys to get comfortable with these ideas of how to be more efficient on the math section and more efficient on the reading section. And these are the tips and tricks I really want you to know before taking the next practice test, which will be tomorrow. So tomorrow is scheduled to be SAT practice test 9 if you're following our 90-day SAT prep series. So that is going to be what you're going to be doing tomorrow, is you'll be taking SAT practice test 9. So I want you to have more of these tips and tricks before you take that. That way you can implement them on SAT practice test 9 to hopefully improve your practice test score and ultimately do better on the SAT when you do take it. So at the end of this little intro, what's going to happen is we're going to have some math tips and tricks videos start playing, and then some of my reading tips and tricks videos are going to start playing. So hopefully they will help you prepare more for that practice test, which you will be taking tomorrow. So that's the purpose of why I included them here. Obviously tomorrow you'll have that practice test number 9, and with that, let's go and get started with these tips and tricks. Here is an SAT math tip and trick that you can use when you have a number raised to the power of a fraction. So in this case, I'm going to use question 12 from SAT practice test 5 to illustrate as an example. So we have, which of the following is equivalent to 9 raised to the power of 3 over 4? Well, anytime that we have a number raised to the power of a fraction, our denominator of our fraction, or our bottom number, is going to be our root. So in this case, since we have 9 raised to the power of 3/4, we're going to have the fourth root of 9 to the third power. Now, one thing that we can also do, since when we look at our answer choices, we don't have that as an option, right? We see we don't have the fourth root of 9 to the third power as an answer choice. Then what we're going to want to do is take 9, and we know that 9 is equal to 3 squared. So then we're going to put 3 squared in for 9. So we're going to have the fourth root of 3 squared to the third power. 3 squared to the third power. Now, one thing that we know is that with exponents, when we have something like 3 squared raised to the third power, right, and I'll rewrite that. Let's say we have 3 squared raised to the third power. Okay, anytime we have a power raised to a power, we're going to multiply them. Okay, so that's going to equal 3 to the power of 2 times 3, which is going to equal, obviously, 3 to the 6th power. So now we have the fourth root of 3 to the 6th power. Okay, so what we can do now is we can actually rewrite that. We know that the fourth root of 3 to the 6th power is the same as 3 raised to the power of 6 over 4. Okay, so we got 3 raised to the power of 6 over 4. Now, what can we do here? We can simplify that. Okay, obviously 6 over 4 is the same as 3 over 2, so we're going to have 3 to the power of 3 over 2, which obviously when we look at our answer choices, we don't have that because we have to have it in the form with a root. So then when we do that, we have 3 to the power of 3 over 2. We know that that's going to be equal to the 3 to the first power plus, or multiplied by, multiplied by 3 to the 1/2 power. Since when we multiply with the same base, we add our exponents, we know that 3 to the power of 3 over 2 is going to equal 3 to the first power times 3 to the 1/2 power. Now, obviously, 3 to the 1/2 power then is going to be the square root of 3. Okay, so we're going to be left with 3 times the square root of 3, which when we look at our answer choices, we see is going to be answer choice D. So D will be our correct answer for this question. So the tips and tricks that you need to keep in mind when dealing with fractions as your exponent is that your denominator is going to be your root, and your numerator is going to be what goes with your base underneath that root. Now, the other thing you're going to want to keep in mind is if you don't see an answer choice after doing that, then take a look at your base number. In this case, the base number was 9, and see if you can turn that into something with an exponent. So in this case, 9 was equal to 3 squared. So then you're going to want to put in 3 squared for 9 and try to solve from there. Right, so those are the big things you want to understand for exponents. Hopefully this video is helpful. Here is an SAT tip and trick for you that deals with raising a number to the power of 0 and also flipping a function over its x-axis. So to illustrate these two tips, I'm going to take a look at question 14 from SAT practice test 5. So if we look at question 14 from SAT practice test 5, it tells us that f of x is equal to 2 to the power of x plus 1. It says the function f is defined by the equation above. Which of the following is the graph of y equals negative f of x in the xy plane? Well, if we're going to do this, we know that y is equal to negative f of x. So what we're going to do then is take f of x, and we're just going to put a negative sign in front of this 2 to the power of x and this plus 1. So we put a negative sign in front of that. Now we have negative f of x. So all we're going to do then is graph this equation. Now the first thing that I'm going to look for whenever I'm graphing an equation is obviously where my y-intercept is going to be. So my y-intercept is going to be where x equals 0. So if I put a 0 in here for x, then I'm going to have 2 raised to the 0 power. Now anything raised to the power of 0 is 1. So keep in mind, if you have 2 raised to the power of 0, 1 raised to the power of 0, 10,000 raised to the power of 0, anything raised to the power of 0 is going to equal 1. Okay, some people argue about whether or not 0 raised to the 0 power is 1 or if it's 0, but you don't have to worry about that because I don't think that they'd ever put that on the SAT math section because it's not really agreed upon mathematicians. Just know anything raised to the 0 power is going to be 1. Okay, so we got 2 raised to the 0 power. We know that's going to be 1. So now we're going to have negative 1 plus 1. We know that that's going to equal negative 2. Okay, so when x is 0, we need to have our graph be at negative 2 for y. So I look at option A, I see I don't have that, A must be wrong. I look at option B, I see B is at negative 1. That one must be wrong as well. I look at option C, I see that that does have my y-intercept at negative 2. So that could be correct. I look at D, I see that that's at negative 1. I see my answer then must be C. All right, so I know my answer there has to be C. Now, another way that you could go ahead and get rid of options A and option B as answer choices, or at least option B, is when you look at, or really option A and B, is just if you were to take a look at the original equation, right? So I'll erase this so you can see it. We have 2 to the power of x plus 1, right? So we know that if we just plotted this and we ignored this negative sign, it looks something like this, right? It'd be increasingly exponential, right? It'd just keep going higher and higher. Okay, so then if we're going to flip that over its x-axis, we would have our graph look something like this, where we go increasingly down. Okay, so we would have to go increasingly down. We see in option A, we don't do that. We see in option B, we don't do that. So right off the bat, you could get rid of those two. You'd be between A and D at that point. And that's where understanding that anything raised to the power of 0 equals 1 comes in handy, because by doing that, you can find your y-intercept, find what the correct answer is. So hopefully this video is helpful. The big things to take away are that anything raised to the power of 0 is going to equal 1, and then also just understanding that if you have y equals negative f of x, you're just flipping f of x over its x-axis. So those are the two big things to understand from this video. Hopefully it was helpful. Here's an SAT math tip and trick for you that deals with canceling units and cost equations. So to illustrate these tips, I'm going to take a look at question 15 from SAT practice test 5. So the question says, Alan drives an average of 100 miles each week. His car can travel at an average of 25 miles per gallon of gasoline. Alan would like to reduce his weekly expenditure on gasoline by $5. Assume gasoline costs $4 per gallon. Which equation can Alan use to determine how many fewer average miles M he should drive each week? Okay, so in this case, I have a cost equation. I want to reduce my cost by $5. So I'm going to set it equal to $5. Now I want to use my variable M for how many less average miles I'm driving. Okay, so my variable M is going to be my miles that I'm driving less, so my decrease in miles. Now I want to end with $5, right? So I'll put that right there. And this is where the canceling units comes in. If you can use units to cancel, you're going to be able to help yourself get to the correct answer. I'm going to show you why here. So we're going to have some amount of miles, M. Now we need to cancel miles because our final answer has to be in dollars. So if we're going to cancel miles and we have miles in our numerator right now, in our denominator we have to have some sort of miles, right? Now in this case, if I take a look at everything that I've underlined, the obvious choice here is going to be my 25 miles per gallon, okay? Why would I not pick that 100 miles each week? Because that's not including my gallons, and I also need my gallons to cancel because my cost is $4 per gallon. So up top, I'm going to have my $4 per gallon because I need dollars in my numerator in order to get, or I'm sorry, I need gallons in my numerator and in my denominator so that they cancel. So I'll go ahead and show you that. I've got $4 per gallon as my cost per gallon. I need to divide that then by that 25 miles per gallon. Okay, we see here that I have gallon over gallon. All right, I'll put that in red so you can see it. I'll underline it. We have a gallon over gallon. So those two are going to cancel. I also see I have amount of miles multiplied by a amount of miles driven M, right? Capital, I'll put a capital M there, just so you understand that that is my miles driven M. Put a capital M right there. I'll put it in black so that you can see it better. So we got our miles driven there, right? So now we see that our gallons are going to cancel. We see that our miles are going to cancel. We're going to be left with that $5 cost. So this is the equation that we're going to want. Another way that you can look at this as well is you can just think, if I want to save $5 and I have to drive a certain amount of miles less, I have to multiply then by the cost per mile, which means I'm going to take that $4 and I've got to split that $4 cost per gallon over how many miles I get per gallon. So that's another way you can think about these cost equations. Is you're driving some amount of miles M, you need the average cost per mile, which is going to be that $4 per gallon over the 25 miles you're getting per gallon. So you want to get it into that average cost per mile, and that's how you would do that. So correct answer here, if we look at our equations, we need to have 4 over 25 M equals 5, and we see that that answer there is going to be D. So D would be the correct answer there. So the big things to understand here is canceling units. We see in this one our gallons are going to cancel, our miles are going to cancel, and we're going to be left with our final answer in dollars, just like we need according to our question. And you see that the canceling of units can make sure you have things in the right place, right? For example, let's say you had 25 over 4. Your units will not cancel then, right? You had 25 miles per gallon all over $4 per gallon. And keep in mind that I'm showing you this. This is obviously the wrong answer, right? I showed you the correct answer. Now I'm showing you the wrong answer. So I'll actually write this all in red so you know it's wrong. But I just want to show you how the units won't cancel if you do it wrong. If you were to do this question wrong and you thought 25 went up top, I'm going to show you how your units aren't going to cancel out. All right, so if you had 4 on bottom, $4 per gallon, you see that your gallons will still cancel, but your miles, all right, you got to multiply by your amount of miles. Your miles, you're going to end up with miles squared, okay, because you have miles in your numerator and multiplied by it again in your numerator right there. So you'd end up with miles squared, and you need it to equal dollars. So that's a way that you can know if your answer is correct or incorrect, is if you get the wrong units. Okay, so that's an example of how canceling units is going to help you make sure that you're doing the problem correctly. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. If it was, so today I have an SAT math tip for you that deals with having a common denominator when adding and subtracting fractions. So if we take a look at question 19 from SAT practice test 5, we have 2x plus 6 over x plus 2 squared minus 2 over x plus 2. So in order to get a common denominator here, we need to multiply by x plus 2 in our denominator and x plus 2 in our numerator. Now when we do that, we have to distribute that negative 2 to our x and our 2. So now when we do that, what we're going to be left with is we're going to have 2x plus 6 all over our x plus 2 squared minus 2x plus, or minus 4, right? Because we have our negative 2 times 2, which will give us minus 4. Okay, so we'll have minus 2x and then minus 4. Minus 2x and minus 4. And obviously that's all over x plus 2 squared, since that is indeed our common denominator. So at this point, you see you're going to have 2x, and I'll put this in blue. You're going to have a 2x here, minus 2x here. Those are going to cancel. Then you'll have a plus 6 minus 4. 6 minus 4 is going to leave you with 2. Now keep in mind, you always want to pay attention on the SAT math section to what you're asked to answer with, and that's the value of a. We know a is what is in our numerator in our answer, so then our answer there would be 2. So the big thing for this tip and trick is just understanding if you're going to add or subtract fractions, you need to have a common denominator. So hopefully this video is helpful. So today I have an SAT math tip for you that deals with being as efficient as possible when solving for questions dealing with angles. So if we take a look at question 20 from SAT practice test 5, this is going to illustrate my point and my tip and what I'm talking about. So we're asked for what the value is of x, right? So obviously we need to solve for angle x. So the first step, obviously, in solving any angles problem is determining the angle you need to find. In this case, that's x. Now the next step, since you don't know x, is you need to find the angle that you need to find that angle, right? In that case, that's going to be this angle right here. That's going to be, we'll call it angle y. Okay, so the first thing, you find the angle you need to solve for. That's going to be x. Then you find the other angle you need to solve for to get x. In this case, that's going to be angle y, which I just labeled here. How do I know that that's the angle that I need? Well, if I take a look, we have line R, and we see that line R has x and y. So that means that angle x plus angle y have to equal 180 since it's along one line, right? And sometimes there are different ways that you can solve for one angle. In this case, the only way you can solve for x is to solve for y. So the next tip that I have for dealing with these angles questions is to only solve for the angles that you need to get to your correct answer. For example, I should not be solving for my angle right here, right? I know obviously that this angle is going to equal 106, but there's no need for me to solve for this angle since I know it's 106 here. There's no need for me to mark that it's 106 there either. Okay, what I need to do here is I need to solve for my angle right here, right? And I'll put it in blue so you can see it better. I need to solve for the angle right here in my triangle. That way I can take 23 plus this blue angle here, which I'll call angle Z. I take 23 plus that angle Z, and I set it equal to 180 in order to solve for y and then solve for x. Okay, so solving for an angle right here as well, where I'm going to put this big arrow to, we'll call that angle, I'll just put it in red so you can see it. Solving for this angle gets me no points and it helps me not at all. So I don't want to solve for that one because it's useless. So solving for, or same thing here, right? Those are angles I don't need to solve for. Same thing. Everything in red are angles that aren't going to help you. So I'm marking all of those so that you understand that they're useless to find, okay? So all of those angles that I marked in red are ones that are inefficient. If you're solving for those angles, you're wasting your time. Okay, whenever you're dealing with angles questions, only solve for the angles that are going to help you get to your correct answer. If you're solving for any others, you're wasting time and you're being inefficient. You want to be as efficient as possible on the SAT math section. Okay, so those are angles that aren't going to help you. So like I said, first thing you want to do, determine the variable you need to solve for. In this case, that's angle x. Then determine the other angles you need to solve for angle x. In this case, that's angle y and angle z. So to solve for angle z, what are we going to do? Well, we know that it's a long line S. So since it's a long line S, we know that if we take 180, we subtract that 106-degree angle from it, we're going to be left with 74 degrees as angle z. Okay, now we've solved for angle z. We know angle z plus this 23 degrees subtracted from 180 is going to give us angle Y. So we do 180 minus that 23 degrees, then minus that 74 degrees, okay, and that's going to give us angle Y. Okay, when we do that, we can go ahead and do this in our heads. 73 and 23 together are going to give us 97. 180 minus 97, that is going to leave us with, I believe, 83. It will leave us with 83. So 83 then will equal our angle Y. Okay, now that we know what angle Y equals, we do 180 since angle X and angle Y are along line R, and we know along a line is going to add to 180. So we take 180, subtract 83, which is angle Y, to get angle X. Okay, and that's going to leave us with angle X equaling 97. So big things with angles questions on the SAT math section, make sure that you're only solving for the angles that'll help you get to your correct answer. If you're solving for any other angles, you're wasting your time and you're being inefficient. So hopefully that was helpful. Today I have an SAT math tip and trick for you that deals with function tables like the one shown in question 2 from SAT practice test 5. So I'll use question 2 to illustrate my tip and trick here for these function tables. The question states that some values of the linear function f are shown in the table above. Which of the following defines f? So whenever I'm dealing with function tables like this, what I'm going to look to do is I'm going to look at things jumping from one variable in x to the next, and then also how it jumps the same way in f of x, right? So in this case, I see I go from 1 to 3, that's an increase of 2, and I see I go from 5 to 13, that's an increase of 8. So what I'm looking for here is I'm going to take a look at my answer choices when I'm dealing with these function tables, and I'm going to look at my slopes and my intercepts. In this case, since I'm asked to define f, if I can find that a through d, if any of them have the same intercept or the same slope, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to solve for the other. So in this case, we see that all of our slopes are different, and it's the same with all of our intercepts. Okay, now let's say that answer choice D, it said 5x plus 1. Then what I would do is I would solve for my slopes first. Okay, and here's why. By solving for my slope, if that did say 5x plus 1, I would be able to find my right answer without solving my intercept. Now let's say that my slope in part D just said 4x. Okay, and it was just plus 0 like it is now. Then what I would do is I would solve for my intercept, because by solving for my intercept first, I can get my right answer without solving for my slope, right? So those are the big things there. Now, in this case, I'm going to solve for my slope just because I think it's easier to do in these types of problems. So what I see is I go from, and also if it had a 0 here, right? If it had 0 for x, it'd be giving me my intercept. So then I would look to solve for the intercept, but it's not. So in this case, I'm going to solve for my slope. So that's just one other thing. If it did have a 0 for an x value, that would be giving me my intercept. So then I would solve for the intercept. But in this case, it's going to be easier to solve for the slope. So what I'm going to do here is I see I go from 1 to 3. I know that's a change in x of 2. I know my slope is going to equal my rise over my run, or my change in y over my change in x. So my change in x, there's 2. I see I go up 8 from 5 to 13. So my slope's 8 over 2, which is going to equal 4x. So my answer there would be C. So the big things here is if you're dealing with a function table like this, always check and see if there's a 0 value for x. Because if there's a 0 value for x and it's linear, you can go ahead and find, or if there's a 0 value for x period, you can find an intercept, right? So then by finding that intercept, you could obviously find your answer choice pretty quickly. Unless there were two of the same intercept, then you have to go and find your slope. In this case, since there was no 0, I thought it easier to find my slope since all my slopes were different. So those are just things you can look for on these function tables in order to help you have to do less work, right? So hopefully that was helpful. Here's an SAT math tip and trick that deals with canceling units to make sure you're getting to your correct answer. I talked about this briefly in a tip and trick video previously, but I want to dedicate a full tip video to it because I think it's that important. So to start, let's take a look at question number 3 from SAT practice test 5. So it states that to make a bakery signature chocolate muffins, a baker needs 2.5 ounces of chocolate for each muffin. How many pounds? Now keep in mind, we talked 2.5 ounces above. Now we're talking about pounds. Always pay attention to changes in units of chocolate are needed to make 48 signature chocolate muffins. Okay, so we have to make 48 chocolate muffins. I'll use M for muffins. Now, I need to get the number of ounces of chocolate I need in order to get the number of pounds of chocolate I need. So I'm going to multiply by the fact that I need 2.5 ounces per muffin. Okay, so I'll use OU to represent ounces, and that's per one muffin. So that's going to give me my number of ounces of chocolate that I'm going to need. So as we can see, we're going to have to cancel our units of muffins to end with our units in ounces. So that's how we're using canceling units to make sure we're doing this problem correctly. When we plug in 48 times 2.5 in our calculator, because this is on the with calculator section, we're going to end up with 120 ounces. So 120 OU for ounces. Now we take that 120 ounces because we have to answer in pounds, okay? D is incorrect because we have to answer in pounds. So we have 120 ounces. Now we're told that 1 pound is equal to 16 ounces. So then we're going to multiply with our ounces on bottom to cancel our ounces. So we know that 16 must go on the bottom, and we must have 1 pound or 1 lb on top. When we do that, our ounces are going to cancel, and we're going to have 120 over 16, which will leave us with 7.5 pounds as our answer. Okay, so that is how you can use canceling units in order to make sure you're getting to your correct answer. So our answer there is going to be A. Now I'm going to give you another example of this with question 9 from the same SAT practice test 5. So let's go down, let's find question 9. Alright, it's right here. Let me erase it real quick so that you can see what I'm going to do here. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at our question here. So it deals with Olympic Games and converting between kilometers and miles. So we have in the 1908 Olympic Games, the Olympic marathon was lengthened from 40 kilometers to approximately 42 kilometers. Of the following, which is closest to the increase in the distance, so I'm looking at a change in distance, a positive change, of the Olympic marathon in miles. So we know that we increased from 40 kilometers to 42. That's a change of 2 kilometers because 42 minus 40 is 2. So we have a change of 2 kilometers. We're asked for what that change is in miles. So we know that 1 mile is approximately 16 kilometers. Therefore, 1 mile is approximately 1.6 kilometers. So once again, we need kilometers on bottom to cancel our units. So we'll put 1m for mile on top. We got to divide by 1.6 kilometers to cancel kilometers and end with our units in miles. So we see we're going to have 2 over 1.6. I'll plug that into my calculator. And I see that I'm going to get 1.25 miles. So my correct answer will be 1.25, which will be answer choice B. So hopefully you can see how canceling units is going to help you make sure that you're doing the correct ratio and getting to that correct answer. So hopefully this video is helpful. Today I have an SAT math tip for you that deals with the difference of perfect squares. So in this case, I'm going to use question 30 from SAT practice test 5 to illustrate my tip. So I have the equation y equals x squared minus a. I'm told in the equation above a is a positive constant and the graph in the xy plane is a parabola. Which of the following is an equivalent form of the equation? So the first thing that jumps out to me right away is that I have x squared and I have minus a, but I don't have any ax term. So I see that there is no ax term. So immediately what I'm thinking, since there's no ax term, is that this must be difference of perfect squares, or is likely difference of perfect squares. Now, if you don't know what what the difference of perfect squares is, I'm going to show you right now. Okay, and I'm actually going to use the correct answer to illustrate my point here. So I've got answer choice B is going to be my correct answer. I'm going to show you how I know that this is the difference of perfect squares. When I take x and I multiply it by x, I'm going to get x squared, right? Just like in the difference of perfect squares. Now, when I take x and I multiply it by negative a, I also have to take this a here and multiply it by x. So now I'm going to have a negative x times root a and a positive x times root a, which we know will cancel because we have minus x times root a plus x times root a, which will cancel and leave me with no xa term. Now I'm also going to have a positive root a times a root a. Now that's going to give us negative root a squared, right? Minus root a squared, since we have a negative sign right here and we have a root a times root a. Obviously, squared times square root is going to leave us with just a, right? Just minus a. So we'll have minus a. Okay, so that's our difference of perfect squares. Obviously, middle term cancels, and then we see we're just going to have x squared minus a. So that is difference of perfect squares. Another way that you can think of it, and I'll put this in without the square root term. B is the correct answer here, obviously, as I just showed. Now, I just want to show another way to view it without the square root sign at the end, because oftentimes it does show up without a square root like that. So let's just say that we wrote it like this, and we'll use a y and an x, right? Let's say we had x plus y times x minus y. This is the difference of perfect squares rule. Obviously, we're going to end up with x squared. And then we're going to have plus yx and a minus yx, which will cancel. Then we're going to have a plus y squared times a minus y, a plus y times a minus y, and that will leave us with minus y squared. So we would end up with x squared minus y squared. Key thing that can help you recognize that it's the difference of perfect squares is that there is no xy term. No xy term, okay, because it cancels out. So that's the key thing you should know about the difference of perfect squares. Being able to identify it will help you move faster on the SAT math section. That's why I think it's important to know, because it'll save you a lot of time. Okay, so hopefully this video is helpful. Here is an SAT math tip I have for you today. So when you take the SAT math section, be it the with calculator or the without calculator section, you're going to be given a bunch of equations with shapes as references. Now, understanding these equations is crucial to scoring high on the SAT math section. Now, one thing I also recommend doing for the SAT math section is memorizing all of these equations. Now, the reason I recommend memorizing all these equations is so that way you don't have to flip back and forth between your questions and the reference page during the SAT math section. Because if you're flipping back and forth to find these equations and you don't have them memorized, it's going to end up wasting time. Whereas if you have them memorized, you're going to be able to know them right away, implement them on the question, and you're not going to waste time flipping back and forth between pages. Because flipping between pages pages earns you 0 points on the SAT. So memorizing these equations and understanding how they work is crucial to scoring high on the SAT in my opinion. Therefore, you want to go into the SAT having these equations memorized. Now, the other thing that you should understand is also these little three sentences down here. The number of degrees of an arc in a circle is 360 degrees, number of radians of arc in a circle is 2 pi, and the sum of the measures and degrees of the angles of a triangle is 180. If you can memorize these equations and those three sentences right there, it's definitely going to help you improve your speed on the SAT math section for the with calculator and the without calculator. So hopefully this was helpful. Today I have an SAT reading tip for you that deals with inference questions on the SAT reading section. So to illustrate my strategy for inference questions and the tip that I have for inference questions, I want to use question 3 from SAT Practice Test 5. Question 3 states that it can be reasonably inferred that Irma, the waitress, thinks Limey is through eating in line 37 because what? Well, for this tip, I want to talk about how for inference questions, you want to be able to support any answer that you choose with evidence. So any answer that is correct has to be supported by evidence in the text in order for it to be correct, because if it wasn't supported by evidence in the text, it couldn't possibly be a correct answer since the SAT has to have an objective way to score these tests. Therefore, your answer has to have support from the text. So I see also I'm directed to line 37 for this one. So that's where I'm going to start, is I'm going to go to line 37. And when I'm answering these inference questions, I'm going to look for something that starts a little bit before that. So in this case, line 37 we see is going to be right where I'm underlining. I'm going to start at the beginning of that sentence so I know more context going into it. So I have when Limey put down his fork and began to count them off one by one on the fingers of his left hand, the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating and tried to take his plate away. Okay, so my question it was asking me, and I'll go down and read it. It's asking me, why does the waitress think that Limey's through eating, basically, right? Why does Irma the waitress think Limey's through eating? Well, we see that the action that causes her to think he's through eating is him putting down his fork, right? That's our textual evidence to give us our answer there. He puts down his fork, and that indicates to the waitress that he must be through eating. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and answer that one. Our correct answer is going to be he's no longer holding his fork. Now, obviously, you don't have time to read this passage because this is going to be a short tip and trick video, but let's go ahead and cover why A, B, and D are all wrong and what you can learn from that for future inference questions that you may encounter on the SAT reading section. So option A, he has begun reading his book. Okay, in this passage, he has already been reading his book for a while before she tries to take his plate. So therefore, that answer cannot be correct. Okay, it can't be correct because it's not factually true. Also, even though he has been reading his book, he did not just begin to. Okay, so that is factually incorrect. Furthermore, since he has already been reading his book for a while, that would not indicate to her that he's just now through eating. All right, next option, his plate is empty. The passage at no point says that his plate is empty. So once again, that's going to be factually incorrect, right? At no point does it say his plate's empty. Furthermore, he tries to stop her from taking his plate in the lines that follow. I'll go ahead and show you that. We see he stopped her, right? I'll go ahead and circle that. He stopped her. Would he stop her if his plate was empty? No, he would let her take it because his plate is not empty, though. He wants to hold on to his plate. He does not want her to take it. Therefore, his plate is not empty, right? Nowhere does it say his plate is empty. Therefore, incorrect. Okay, option D, he has asked her to clear the table. Once again, that is not contained in the passage, therefore that is going to be wrong. Okay, he never asks her to clear the table. So correct answer here is going to be C for this inference question. So the big tips with inference questions are to make sure you support your answer with evidence from the text. Now, sometimes with an inference question, the next question will be your answer to the question above can be supported by which of the following lines or something like that, where you have to find evidence to support it. Now, even if you're not prompted in the next question, which in this case you're not, to find the lines that support your answer, you should still understand where the support for your answer comes from. If you're going to answer an inference question, you should understand that it has to have support from the text. If it doesn't have support from the text, then you're probably answering it with the wrong answer. So hopefully this video was helpful. Today I have an SAT reading section tip for you that deals with paired questions. So in this case, a paired question is going to be question 33 with its evidence question 34. So the first question you have to answer that, and your second question will ask you to find the lines that support your answer to the previous question. So in this case, I'm going to use questions 33 and 34 to illustrate as an example, and then also questions 42 and 43 to illustrate as an example. So this is going to be from SAT Practice Test 5. We see question 33, we have to answer that one, and then question 34, we're told which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question. So let's go ahead and take a look at 33. I'm not going to read the whole passage because that would kind of waste our time here, so I'll just kind of give you a summary of it as I go through question 33, as well as the tips that you need to know to answer these types of questions on the SAT reading section. So, the author of the passage suggests that crowds may be more effective at what? Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and tell you the correct answer. The correct answer here is going to be C. Okay, the author of the passage, in his text, he suggests that crowds are more effective at arriving at accurate quantitative answers than producing valid qualitative judgments. Now, I also want to go through A, B, and D and tell you why those ones are wrong real quick. For A, B, and D, all three of these, they're all wrong for the same reason in this case, and that's that the author never makes these claims, right? He never says that creating controversy or that crowds may be more effective at creating controversy than examining an issue in depth. He never says that, therefore it's unsupported and wrong. Any answer choice that can't be supported by the text is wrong. So A is wrong. B, reinforcing members' ideas rather than challenging those ideas. Once again, the author never makes that claim. Okay, so that's unsupported by the text. Okay, unsupported by text. There's no possible way we could support option A or option B or option D. In this case, all of them are wrong because none of them could be supported by the text, and they're all really kind of off in that there's really nowhere that we talk about anything with A, B, or D. So they're all pretty obviously wrong, okay? And they're obviously unsupported by the text since we would have no evidence to support it with. Okay, so in this case, obviously, if you had read the passage, you would see that obviously C would be the correct answer. I'm not going to go back and read the whole passage because I'm trying to just illustrate this as a tip and trick. But once you see you get your answer C, you have arriving at accurate quantitative answers rather than producing valid qualitative judgments. So now here's where the big tips come in, and that's with these evidence questions. So with these evidence questions, what you're going to want to do is the first thing you want to think is, where's my evidence for that previous question, right? And for the question that you answered previously, you should have evidence for it anyways, right, already in mind, because any answer choice that you pick on the SAT reading section, you should be able to support with the text, because if you can't support it with the text, then you're probably wrong. Okay, all answer choices have to be able to be supported by the text for the SAT reading section, or all correct answer choices have to be. So you should already have an idea of what your evidence is going to be. Now, let's say that you know where your evidence is going to be, then just go back, find it, and then you'll find your answer. Now, let's say that you don't quite exactly remember what lines it was in, right? You're not sure if it was in line 9 or in 17 to 20 or 11 to 14 or 25 to 28. This is where my tip is going to come in. Now, we know in our previous question that our answer was that the crowd is better at arriving at accurate quantitative answers than valid qualitative judgments. Well, quantitative answers is going to involve numbers. So now if I take a look at my options here, I see I have the word number at the end of 11 to 14. Okay, so that's something dealing with quantitative numbers, right? Or quantitative answers coming from the crowd. Okay, so that's what I'm going to call, we can call it a keyword, right? Really what you just need to understand is that it's an indicator word, right? It's indicating that it's quite possible that these lines are going to contain the best evidence, right? So in this case, the word that I'm looking at is number, since I was talking about quantitative things in my answer. So that's where I would start if I didn't already know where my lines were going to be. These would be where I'd start. And then what this is going to do is this is going to help me, because if I go to lines 11 to 14 now, if I go to lines 11 to 14, I see it says, your guess is probably going to be far from the mark, whereas the average of many people's choices is remarkably close to the true number. And if we get some more context on this by reading back, we see that sometimes the crowd really is wiser than you. The classic examples are guessing the weight of a bull or the number of gumballs in a jar. Your guess is probably far from the mark, whereas the average of many people's choices are remarkably close to the true number. So that's showing that crowds are good at producing solid quantitative answers there, and so we know that that'll be our answer. Okay, so that's going to be lines 11 to 14. All right, so that's the big tip here, is that if you're not quite sure where the lines are, okay, say that you have a good idea of the evidence, but you don't quite remember what lines it were in, try to look for a keyword from your previous answer choice. In that case, it was talking about quantitative numbers, thus we look for the word number. Okay, now if I hadn't seen the word number, then the next thing I would look at is the word value, okay, because value could also indicate potentially something that's quantitative, but number would be more likely to indicate a quantitative thing. That's why I started there. And then obviously when I went to those lines, it clearly gave me the best evidence I could have, thus I selected B, and I wouldn't even go through and read C, D, or A, because I know that B has to be correct since that supported my previous answer. All right, now let's go ahead and do another example of this with question 42 and 43. All right, so this is going to be a different passage. This passage is going to be talking about the art and science of remembering everything. Okay, so let's go find our questions. So we got 42 and 43. So once again, I've already read this passage. I'm not going to go through and read it all again for you. I'm just going to kind of give you a summary and try to illustrate this tip as I go through. So we have, according to the passage, McGuire's findings regarding taxi drivers are significant because what? Well, in this case, they're significant because they call into question an earlier consensus. And now I'm going to go ahead and just give you the reasons why A, B, and D are wrong for this one as well. So A, demonstrate the validity of a new method. Okay, these results don't do that. If you read through the passage, you'd understand that the results aren't testing a new method, thus A is going to be incorrect. B, providing evidence for a popular viewpoint. Once again, we aren't doing that in this passage. Okay, we aren't going in through and providing evidence for any popular viewpoint. In fact, we know that they aren't supporting a popular viewpoint because they're calling into question a previous popular viewpoint or an earlier consensus. So we know that B is incorrect as well. If we look at option D, we have challenged the authenticity of previous data. Once again, they're not challenging any authenticity of previous data, thus D would be incorrect. Okay, so now let's get into the big things with the tips for finding this evidence. So let's take a look. We know that the correct answer here is calling into question an earlier consensus, right? And obviously, if you read the passage, you'd find that answer pretty quick because it's the only one that's true. It's the only one that can be supported by the text. So now you know your answer, right? You have to support now in question 43 the idea that these findings regarding taxi drivers are significant because they're calling into question an earlier consensus. Now, what is an earlier consensus? Well, that's something people believed were true in the past, okay? So in the past, people believed this earlier consensus was true, right? Everyone agreed upon it. They said, oh, this thing must be true. Okay, so what are some potential keywords I should be looking for then in 43 to find where to start? Now, obviously, if I already knew where my lines were and I remembered what the best evidence was, I just go find it, find my correct answer, right? But let's say that we don't quite remember which lines it was from. In that case, what we want to do is we want to look for a keyword to know where to start. That way we're not just going blind through all these lines and wasting time. So in this case, calling into question an earlier consensus, I'm going to look for something like fact. Okay, these are going to be my keywords I'm going to look for to know where to start in these lines. A fact, something that's true, something that everyone believed. Okay, so those would be sort of the keywords I'd be looking at if I didn't know where to start. So let's go ahead and take a look and let's see if we have any of those. I see I don't have believed and I see I don't have the word fact. But what I do see I have is I have true. And the other thing I see is I have past tense. I see I have the word had. Had is in the past tense. So now I have past tense and the word true. Thus, in the past, they probably believed something was true, right? Thus, calling into question an earlier consensus, something people previously believed had been true. So that's where I would start. Now keep in mind, you can't just click on or select D as your correct answer without going back and looking at it to make sure that it does support your answer, right? You can't just rely on these keywords, but what they do is give you a great place to start. So that way, if you go to those lines and they give you that correct answer, they do support that previous question, your answer to that previous question. You don't have to read then C, B, and A. So what it's going to do is it's just going to help you be more efficient by not having to read all four answer choices because you kind of have a good idea of where to start, and oftentimes that will get you to your correct answer. Now, sometimes you'll use your keywords and you'll go to the text and it won't be something that is supporting your answer, and then you'll have to go through and you'll have to find the evidence some other way. But what this does do is it does help you in becoming more efficient, and it's more likely that it's going to contain support for your answer considering it has those keywords. It's a great place to start. So that's what I recommend doing for the SAT reading section. I'll go quick to lines 20 to 26 to show you how that is going to support our argument. I'll go ahead and highlight it so you can see what I'm talking about. It had long been thought that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons. Okay, so people previously were in consensus that the brains could not spawn new neurons, that while learning caused synapses to rearrange themselves and new links between brain cells to form, the brain's basic anatomical structure was more or less static. Then we have McGuire's new study suggested the old inherent wisdom was simply not true. So it's calling into question that previous consensus in the past. Right, so that's obviously going to be our correct answer there. So hopefully this video was helpful. Today I have an SAT reading tip for you that deals with data interpretation on the reading section. So to illustrate this tip, I'm going to use questions 19, 20, and 21 as an example from SAT Practice Test 8 on how I recommend approaching these types of questions. So this is the data chart that we're going to be using. I'm going to go ahead and go down to question 19, and we're going to start there. And as I go through these questions, I'll be kind of giving you my advice on how to approach these types of questions on the SAT. So we have question 19. According to the graph, social science studies yielding strong results were what? Well, in this case, since I see options A through D are all pretty short, what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to go to my graph and take a look at the strong results, or the science studies that yield strong results, and I'm just going to take a look at what I see in the graph, and then I'm going to go through A through D and take a look at the answer choices. So anytime that I see on a data interpretation question like this that my answer choices are pretty small like this, and I'm given one category, in this case only the studies that are yielding strong results, then I actually take a look at the graph and try to find a general feel for what the graph is showing about those studies yielding strong results, and then I'll run through my answer choices. So here's what I see. All right, I'll zoom out so you can see the whole graph. I see that for my strong results bar, I've got, it's 42% of the total. I see of those published in a top journal, that's going to be right around 20%. So we got 20% published in a top journal. I see that I've got, of those published in a non-top journal, that's going to be roughly 40%, since it's from about 40% to 80%. And then I see of those unpublished but written, I see that that's going to be right around roughly, it looks like close to 30%. And then I see the unwritten, it looks like unwritten's only right around 5%. Okay, so unwritten's gonna be really small there. So the big thing I see here, 20% top journal, unwritten really small, and then we have right around 30% for the unpublished but written and the published and non-top journal. So I'm just gonna take a look, find an answer choice that fits that general idea of what that graph is showing. Okay, so we have unwritten over 50% of the time. No. Okay, we saw that it was strong publication and strong likelihood of being written in this category, since it did yield strong results. Unpublished but written 50% of the time. Also not true. Option C, published in a top journal approximately 20% of the time. Yes, okay, that was that top part of that graph that went from 80 to 100. That's 20% of the time it's published in a top journal. So my answer there is going to be C. Option D says published in a non-top journal almost 80% of the time. That was false. That was right around 40% of the time. Okay, so answer for that one is going to be C. Big tip there, just make sure that you're going back to your graph if you need to make sure you get to the right answer. It's always okay to go back to the text and back to the graphs on the SAT reading section. Question 20, which of the following statements is supported by the graph? Okay, in this case, I see options A through D are really lengthy, right? So what I want to do here is you have a couple options on how to approach this. Really, there's the two options that I recommend. It doesn't necessarily matter too much which one you pick. You can go either way. So one thing that you could do is you could go to the graph and get a generalized feel for the graph, kind of see what it's pointing to, and then go through options A through D and find what's correct. Another option is you could take a look at A, read it, and then go check it with the graph, see if it's correct. Read B, read it, kind of get an understanding, go check with the graph, see if it's correct. What I generally prefer to do is I generally prefer to go to my graph first and just take a look at what it is, get a general feel for it, and then go down and take a look at what my options say. So in this case, I see strong results. They're really a lot more likely to get published in that top journal, right? As we see that, as we go down to these nil results, that top journal likelihood goes from 20% down to like 15, down to like 10, right? As pretty much I see a general trend here, right? If we look, we see things going in this direction, right? So we see the likelihood of something going unwritten increases as it goes from strong results to the null results. We see the likelihood of something being published in a non-top journal is also going down as we go towards those null results. So basically, something with strong results is far more likely to be written and published in a non-top journal and published in a top journal than those with mixed results and null results. That's really the pattern I'm going to be looking for in question 20. Okay, so we see option A, studies with mixed results were just as likely to be published as they were to be left either unpublished or unwritten. All right, well, let's go take a look at that, if that one's correct. In this case, obviously, that didn't show up right away as our answer, so we're just going to go take a look. I do remember that those with mixed results had a pretty good split as far as right down the 50 mark. So let's take a look. It looks like we do have that split at the 50 mark, and that is between being published versus unpublished. Okay, so we have unpublished versus published. We see it split at the 50 mark. Thus, those with mixed results are going to have an equal likelihood of being published as unpublished. So that's going to be correct for number 20. Okay, so in this case, we have 20. Answer there is going to be A, and I'll put it in black so you can see that it's not in red, because sometimes people think red means the wrong answer. So we have option A is our correct answer. Studies with mixed results are just as likely to be published as they were to be left unpublished or unwritten. Okay, that one's factually correct. Next up, we want to go down to 21, and just another quick side note on question 20. If you have a question like this and you got these data interpretation questions with really long answers here, I recommend going from A to D, just because oftentimes, in my opinion, I don't know, I haven't done like a full data analysis on this, but just from what I've seen on practice tests and from how it sort of seems to me, it seems that if they have really long, lengthy parts for the data interpretation question answers, that oftentimes the answers will lie in like A through C rather than being at D, because they know you have to read through all of them. Now, I haven't gone through and checked if that's actually true as to if it's more likely to be an A through C than D on these types of questions, but that's just my general feel. So I would recommend going A through D, but once again, that's just my general feel. All right, so now we got question 21. Which statement from the passage is most directly reflected by the data presented in the graph? So in this case, obviously you haven't read the passage, but I can give you a brief overview of the passage real quick. This passage was pretty much saying that if you have data that is likely to yield strong results, or that yields strong results, it's a lot more likely to be published. And they're also Yeah, that's pretty much all the summary that you need. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. Okay, so in this case, we're asked for which statement from the passage is going to be directly reflected by the data presented in the graph. Now, one thing I want to note on these types of questions, if we take a look at our graph, we know that the data that's represented, it's all about publishing and being written. So, once again, if you watched my video where I talked about finding evidence, okay, and finding lines on that, I talk about the use of keywords to figure out where to start in your lines. Okay, so in this case, since our graph is actually going to supply our keywords. Our graph is talking about things being published, right? The likelihood of things being published, as well as the likelihood of things being written. So those are the keywords that I'd actually be looking for in my lines here to know where to start if I didn't already know which lines there are. Now, if I already knew which lines this is supporting, I'm just going to go find those lines, and then I'm going to click those as my answers, right? Those would be obviously my answers. I don't have to go through the other ones because I already know where it is. But let's say that I forgot where it was. Let's say I don't know if it's in lines 30, line 33, 43, 52, 55. I'm not sure where to start. In that case, what I do is I use these keywords. Okay, in this case, they come from the graph, and they're going to be published and written since those are what the graph is showing. It's showing the likelihoods to be published, likelihoods to be written. So in this case, I look at which one has my keywords. I see that that's going to be C. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to go take a look at lines 43 to 45, see if my graph supports it. So I go up, we got 43 to 45. I'll go ahead and highlight that so you can see it better. So we got 43, we have not unexpectedly, which just means expectedly. The statistical strength of the findings made a huge difference in whether or not they were ever published. And that is what the graph shows, because we see that the stronger the results that are yielded, the higher likelihood it is to be published, right? We can go ahead and show you that as well. Okay, we see that the likelihood of being published is going to be the black bar plus this dashed bar. Okay, so I'm just going to put some highlighter around it so you can see it. We see how high that is here versus it being very, very low in these other two. Okay, all right, so that's going to be our answer there. So big thing there is understanding with these questions where you have to find the lines and find the evidence. Use the keywords if you don't know where to start. Obviously, if you know where to start, you don't have to use the keywords, but if you don't, that's going to be where you start. Now, you can't always just rely on the keywords. You can't find something with a keyword and just pick it as your answer because it has the keyword. You should always go back to the lines and make sure that it is indeed your correct answer, just in case. But it does provide you a great place to start, because now that you've seen that C is the correct answer, you don't have to read B, you don't have to read A, and you don't have to read D. So that's going to save you a lot of time on the reading section. So hopefully this video is helpful. Today I have an SAT reading tip for you that deals with questions about purpose. So to illustrate this tip, I'm going to use questions 2 and questions 9 from SAT practice test 8. So I'm not going to go through and read the whole passage because I just want to keep these tip videos a little bit shorter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at question 2 and question 9, and then I'm going to use them to illustrate this tip. So we have the main purpose of lines 1 through 10 is to do what? Now in this case, since it's just 10 lines, I'm going to go ahead and go there and we'll read through it, and then I'll help you decide on what the purpose is, because in order to answer this one, you would need to read on a little bit, but obviously we don't have time to read through the whole thing. So we have, even then my only friends were made of paper and ink. At school, I had learned to read and write long before the other children. Where my school friends saw notches of ink on incomprehensible pages, I saw light, streets, and people. Words and the mystery of their hidden science fascinated me, and I saw in them a key in which I could unlock a boundless world, a safe haven from that home, those streets, and those troubled days, in which I could sense that only a limited fortune awaited me. Alright, so what is this showing? Well, we know that it's showing that this narrator obviously has a strong passion for writing and for reading, right? Those words and the mystery of their secrets or their hidden science fascinated him. He saw them as a key that he could unlock a boundless world, a safe haven from the struggles in which he grew up in. So it's really describing his passion for writing and reading here. Now, as the passage goes on, because for this one you would have to have read the whole passage to understand it, because this main purpose question, whenever you have a main purpose question, sometimes it helps to understand the big picture, and oftentimes it does help to know the big picture. Now in this case, the big picture is that his drive and his passion for reading and writing are ultimately what is going to drive his actions throughout this story, right? And now what the rest of this passage really talks about is his relationship with some peer and reading, and his relationship really with reading and how that helps him escape from his life at home and his prospects for his future. So let's take a look at our answer choices, and let's talk about the main purpose and some tips for main purpose questions. So obviously one thing I've talked about in another video I made, I can't quite remember which one, but that's the use of the word main in the SAT reading section. Anytime you see the word main purpose or primary focus, anytime you see the words main or primary, that should be indicating to you that you want to look big picture. So in this case, you want to look big picture, what's the purpose of including these lines? All right, well, let's think. If you look at our options here, we see that option A says introduce the characters who play an important or who play a part in the narrative story. There's only one character we're talking about here, okay? The only character we're concerned with at this point is the narrator. So that's wrong because it's saying plural characters and we're only talking really about one. Option B, listing the difficult conditions the narrator endured in childhood. Okay, that right there, you'd be focusing in too narrow on the fact that he did grow up in poor conditions. That's not the main focus of these lines though, and that's not the main purpose of these lines. The main purpose here is we're describing that passion that is driving the narrator in all the actions that he recounts later on in the passage. Now, obviously, you haven't read the passage, so you don't quite understand that. But what you should see is that the whole point of including this is it's showing the passion that he has for reading, right? It talks about how it's his escape. He describes it as a key to a boundless world. Those are all things that are really describing that massive passion that he has for reading and writing. And then we have option D, depicting the narrator's aspirations before he met Sampir. Now, it's not really talking about his aspirations, really, right? It's just talking about how he's really driven and really passionate about reading. Now, while that may seem to some people like it's an aspiration would really be more like something he dreams about doing. Okay, in this case, we're just describing how he's escaping from his world and how he's passionate about reading because it's providing him as this outlet. Okay, so option D would be incorrect. Also, if you read further on in the passage, you'd notice that it really doesn't touch on his aspirations much. So that would really be getting away from the big picture as well. Okay, so answer for number 2 is going to be C. Now let's take a look at question number 9. Number 9 is a similar, it's also a purpose question, but it's a little bit different in the type of purpose question that it is. So let's take a look at question 9. We have the word friend is used twice in lines 57 to 58 to do what? Okay, now in this case, it's a little bit less of a big picture question. Okay, this type of purpose question, and you may not see the word purpose in here. Okay, obviously the word purpose isn't in here, but it's still a purpose question because it's asking us for what the purpose of including the word friend is. Okay, why are we including friend twice in lines 57 to 58? So a purpose question doesn't always have to include the word purpose. Sometimes you just have to realize that it's asking you for what the purpose of doing something is. Okay, why is the author including the word friend twice in lines 57 to 58? So once again, let's go ahead and take a look at lines 57 to 58. Okay, we see that it talks about, I'll give you some context as well. So Sampir, he is a bookstore owner who is a friend of the narrator, and he gives the narrator books for much less than they're worth, and oftentimes for free, right? So he's talking about how Sampir is giving the narrator a book by Mr. Dickens, okay? And the narrator asks, is he a friend of yours? And Sampir says, a lifelong friend, and from now on, he is your friend too. So in this case, what is the purpose of including the word friend to describe the author of this book that Sampir is giving to the narrator? Well, what it's doing is it's showing that Sampir is really, really close to this author. Now, Sampir probably has not met this author because if you know Charles Dickens, you know he's a very, very famous author. So it's unlikely that this bookstore owner is actually friends with him, but he feels like he's friends with him because he has this close connection with reading. So what this is really doing is this is emphasizing that emotional connection that Sampir feels to reading since he's describing him as a friend, and also saying that he will hopefully be a friend of the narrator. So C is the obvious correct answer here. Let's go ahead and run through A, B, and D and show why they're wrong as well, though. So we have option A, underline the importance of the narrator's connection to Sampir. Well, we're not describing the narrator and Sampir as friends here. We're talking about Charles Dickens. So answer there is going to be wrong because that's an incorrect relationship. And that's a wrong answer choice type you want to watch out for on the SAT is an incorrect relationship. You'll see that on the science section sometimes as an incorrect answer as being a reversed relationship. In this case, for the literature section, oftentimes it's just an incorrect relationship. Now, option B, stress how friendships helped the narrator deal with his difficult situation at home. No. Okay, in this case, we really want to focus on the fact that it's an author they're talking about being friends with. Okay, now that's that close connection that they're forming through reading. Okay, that's really what we want to focus on there. Now, option D, implying that the narrator's sentiments caused him to make an irrational decision. That's just really way off topic. Nowhere do we describe an irrational decision. That one's wrong. It's really just an off topic answer choice that will be incorrect for that one. So hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, have a great day.